One of the great attributes of effective leadership, and therefore the fruitfulness of ministry that would follow, is dependent on a leader hearing the Lord and gaining vision for that ministry. People have asked me through the years, is vision natural or is it supernatural? I say the answer to that is yes. I think it's natural, and I think it is supernatural. I think it comes when a leader looks in a very natural way at the world around him and the condition of that world and the time that they live, and say, Lord, where is it that you would have me lead my people in a moment like this? It's supernatural in the fact that God reveals, I think, to a leader that passion that he's already actually put in his heart. In a way, it's discovering that passion. And then with all conviction and with all tenacity, pursuing it with the rest of their life. It's like a tiny speck on a horizon and saying, you know, I'm gonna put all my energies to bear to lead my people to that place. It may take time. Great example of that is the story of Habakkuk, as recorded in the book of Habakkuk, where during the time of the siege of Babylon against Judah, 600 years before Christ, Habakkuk finds himself standing on a rampart wall crying out to the Lord, asking him, you know, what the meaning of all of this is and where is this all going to end. And Habakkuk writes in Habakkuk 2:2 this, he says, "Then the Lord answered me and he said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may run. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens towards the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it, for it will certainly come. It will not delay." I remember the original founder of the Vineyard, John Wimber, always used to say, he said, you know, people vote with their feet. And really, he was really inferring that when people know what it is that a leader's trying to do, where he's trying to take them, then they have a decision to make, and they can vote with their feet. They can either run with it or run away from it. But either way, they need to run. And the only way that that can happen is if they clearly state that vision. And so I think it's important periodically for a leader to sit down and restate that vision and bring great clarity to it. Post it on tablets so that all the people can read it and make a choice about it. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. In 1988, I had been working as an associate pastor in the Lancaster Vineyard in Southern California, and really was at a time of transition in my ministry and in my life, and we decided to come to Idaho. We hadn't been back to Idaho for 20 years, and drove up here with our teenage kids at that time. They had never been in Idaho, and drove through Boise on a journey to meet a friend in Stanley, Idaho. This friend I'd worked for in the summers, building backcountry trails and doing backcountry work with a team of mules during the days that I was a school teacher, and he was going to fly out to Stanley and pick us up and take us back into the Middle Fork of the Salmon River on Mahoney Creek. He had a contract from the government to rebuild that airstrip in there, and so he called me one day and said, "Hey, try, just for old time's sake, why don't you come back up to Idaho and I'll come out and take you back into my camp, and you can drive old Monty and Mike," that was the mules, for a week or so. Boy, and it just sounded so good to me, because we had been working so hard in the ministry for the past 8 to 10 years. And we drove through Boise, and you know, something supernatural happened in both Nancy's and my heart, but also our kids' hearts. We fell in love with this city, and I got to say, it was a supernatural thing. All the time that Nancy and I had attended the College of Idaho in the 60s, we had never really had a great love for Boise. But on this particular trip, 20 years later, as we drove through the city, we fell in love with this place. And I remember going to Stanley, and Nancy and I were decided that evening to go out to dinner on the Salmon River. There was a restaurant in those days that was right on the Salmon River, looking up into the Sawtooth Mountains. I mean, it was a gorgeous setting, beautiful evening. Our kids stayed back at a cabin. We fed them pizza. And we just decided to go out and have this time, a special kind of dinner together. And in the fact that we had had our honeymoon in the Sawtooth Mountains, and kind of relive some of that. And Nancy asked me at that point, knowing that what had happened to us in Boise, if I had ever considered planting a church in Boise. And I don't know what, but I really reacted. There was, I think, a fear in me, because I had seen so many people plant churches and fail. And I was very content and very satisfied in my position in Southern California. And I remember kind of almost shouting at her, saying, no, I wouldn't consider that, but somebody should. Well, she just said, oh, I just thought I'd ask. And the next morning, our friend Pat Armstrong flew in and picked us up, loaded us into a Cessna 180, and we flew back down through the wilderness, down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, until we made this turn into the airstrip there at Mahoney Creek. The airstrip was a mess, but he's a really great backcountry pilot, and we landed alongside the strip there where his camp was. Mules were hobbled there in the field. And we spent then the next week there. And it was funny, because I was bothered. I knew the Lord was trying to speak to me, and I really didn't want to listen at that point, because I really, in my fear of failure, was afraid to come and start some brand new work in a place where I hadn't been for 20 years, didn't know anybody, didn't have any really relationship. I didn't even know how I'd begin. And one morning, Nancy came to me, and we always say, tell the story differently. She says I should go take a walk and seek the Lord, and I always say that she told me to go take a hike, because I was miserable to be with, because I was just in turmoil, you know. And